You ever just look at a globe and think, what if we just gave it a little twist? Not changing the tilt or anything, but just sliding the whole surface around. Well, we're going to dive into that exact thought experiment. What on earth happens when you rotate the planet 90 degrees? So this wild question actually comes from the brilliant webcomic XKCD's What If series. I mean, just think about it. What if we took all the continents exactly as they are and just flipped them on their side? What happens to your city? What happens to, well, everything? The answers, as we're about to find out, are pretty mind-blowing and sometimes just plain weird. All right, first things first. Before we spin the planet like a basketball, we gotta lay down some ground rules. To even begin to make sense of this new world, we have to be clear about what's changing and what isn't. Okay, so here's the deal. We're sliding the entire Earth's crust 90 degrees right along the Greenwich Meridian. The continents, they stay stuck together just like they are now, but their location relative to the equator and the poles gets completely scrambled. The new North Pole ends up floating in the Indian Ocean, and the South Pole, it lands right on the coast of Ecuador. And this is key. The planet's tilts and all the basic laws of physics stay exactly the same. And here's maybe the most important rule of this whole game. We're not talking about some sudden, world-ending disaster. At least, not yet. We're going to imagine that this new Earth has had millions and millions of years to adjust, to let the climate settle down and for all the plants and animals to find their new normal. So to really get our heads around this bizarre new planet, we need a super quick crash course on what makes our own climate tick. It really all boils down to just a few key ideas that create all the weather we know and love. It all starts with the sun, right? It blasts the equator with way more heat than the poles. This creates these massive rotating loops of air called Hadley cells. The easiest way to think about them is as these giant conveyor belts in the sky, constantly moving hot air away from the equator and pulling cool air back in. Now, the planet's spin throws a wrench in the works. It's called the Coriolis effect. And because the Earth is always turning, it actually bends the path of those winds, pushing them to the right in the north and to the left in the south. This little twist is what gives us our familiar east-west wind patterns. And those same rising and falling air currents, they basically create a global rain machine. At the equator, hot, wet air goes up, it cools down, and then it just dumps all that moisture as rain. That's how you get rainforests. Then, that same air, now cool and super dry, sinks back down around 30 degrees latitude. And wherever that dry air sinks, boom, you get a desert. It's a pretty simple pattern, and it shapes almost our entire world. Okay, science class is over. Now that we've got the rules down, let's take a tour of our brand new sideways planet. And you might want to buckle up, because you're in for some serious geographical whiplash. First up, North America gets completely flipped. Central America is now a frozen polar wasteland, buried deep under an ice sheet. At the same time, Arctic Canada, we're talking Baffin Island, is now a tropical paradise. And get this, with all that warm, humid air coming off the new Baffin Bay and hitting the cold air from the Rockies, the Canadian prairies would become the new Tornado Alley. Wild. Over in Europe, things get just as strange. Europe basically becomes the new Southeast Asia. Great Britain and Ireland, they're transformed into steamy jungle islands, a lot like Sumatra or Borneo. The Alps are now sitting right on the equator, making them the only place in the tropics where you'd still find glaciers. Meanwhile, West Africa is now a massive, dense rainforest, and it might even get its own tornado problem. The crazy changes just keep coming. South America cools way down. Brazil ends up with a climate a lot like old-school France or Germany. And the legendary Amazon River, it shrinks down to about the size of the Mississippi. Then in Asia, the coast of Siberia is now tropical, while poor India, stuck behind the Himalayas, becomes a frozen, landlocked wasteland, the new Siberia. But there is one clear winner in this whole global reshuffle, and that winner is Antarctica. With its gigantic ice cap completely gone, it's revealed to be this gorgeous, lush continent almost entirely covered in a highland rainforest. I'm telling you, those lonely research stations are now 5-star tropical resorts. So, talking about continents is one thing, but what does all this mean for the places we actually know? Let's bring this down to a human level and see what happens to some of the world's most famous cities. The changes are just staggering. Mexico City, it's gone, buried under thousands of feet of polar ice. Moscow trades its freezing winters for a blistering hot desert climate, like modern-day Baghdad. Los Angeles swaps its sunshine for the cool, rainy weather of Seattle. And London? London becomes a hot, steamy jungle, pretty much like Bangkok. In fact, in this new London, ordering a spicy curry actually makes sense for the weather. You'd probably find piranhas swimming in the River Thames, and, as the original author cheekily put it would be the only place in the world where tigers would politely apologize to you right before they attack. So far, we've been nice, we gave our planet millions of years to get used to the change. But what if we didn't? What if this 90-degree shift happened overnight? Yeah, it's time for the disaster movie ending. An instant shift would be, and I'm not exaggerating here, a complete and utter catastrophe. The ice caps would melt almost at once, causing sea levels to shoot up by hundreds of feet. The sudden climate shuffle would trigger total ecological collapse and mass extinctions on a scale we can barely even imagine. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. As the Gulf of Mexico rapidly cooled down, all its wildlife would start fleeing north. This leads to a very specific and kinda hilarious problem. You'd have about 5 million lost, confused, and very hungry alligators swimming up the Mississippi River and invading Minnesota. Oh yeah, the whole world of 90s Minnesota-based cinema would be turned on its head. I think the characters from Grumpy Old Men would suddenly have a much bigger problem than their noisy neighbor. And the movie Fargo? It would have a far more reptilian climax. It's a crazy thought, but it just perfectly captures the kind of chaos you'd get from a world literally turned on its side. It really makes you wonder, right? If you could drop any movie's characters into this new upside-down world, who would you pick? What classic film would you love to rewrite for a planet that's just been given a 90-degree twist?